Good morning, faithful listeners. You have tuned in to the P40 Ministries podcast, the one place where you can get a daily explanatory Bible reading to start your day strong. This is your host, Jen, bringing you a brand new episode out of Genesis. Hey there, faithful listeners. This is the P40 Ministries podcast, and this is your host, Jen, and I will be bringing you a brand new episode out of Genesis today. So today we are in Genesis chapter 27, and we will be reading verses 1 through 17. Now this chapter is really interesting, and it's one of the many chapters of the Bible that gets taught at Sunday school, so I'm sure you've heard it before. It is the chapter about Jacob and Esau and how Jacob deceived his father Isaac. I'm going to be reading out of the Amplified version of the Bible today, or the AMP. Now, if you don't have an Amplified version, that is absolutely fine. You can read out of whatever version you usually read out of and whatever version you prefer. So grab your cup of coffee, as you do every single morning, and let's go ahead and start reading. Now when Isaac was old, and his eyes were too dim to see, he called his elder and favorite son Esau, and said to him, "My son." And Esau answered him, "Here I am." Isaac said, "See here, I am old. I don't know when I may die. So now please take your hunting gear, your quiver of arrows and your bow, and go out into the open country and hunt some game for me, and make me a savory and delicious dish of meat, the kind that I love, and bring it to me to eat, so that my soul may bless you as my firstborn son before I die." But Rebekah overheard what Isaac said to Esau his son. And when Esau had gone into the open country to hunt for game that he might bring back, Rebekah said to Jacob, her younger and favorite son, "Listen carefully. I heard your father saying to Esau your brother, 'Bring me some game and make me some savory and delicious dishes of meat, so that I may eat it and declare my blessing on you in the presence of the Lord before my death. So now, my son, listen carefully to me and do exactly as I command you. Go now to the flock and bring me 2 good and suitable young goats, and I will make them into a savory dish of meat for your father, the kind he loves to eat. Then you shall bring it to your father to eat, so that he may bless you before his death." Jacob said to Rebekah his mother, "Listen, Esau my brother is a hairy man, and I am smooth-skinned. Suppose my father touches me and feels my skin, then I will be seen by him as a cheat and impostor, and I will bring a curse upon me and not a blessing." But his mother said to him, "May your curse be on me, my son. Only listen and obey me. Go and bring the young goats to me." So Jacob went and got the 2 goats and brought them to his mother, and his mother prepared a delicious dish of food with a delightful aroma, the kind his father loved to eat. Then Rebekah took her elder son Esau's best clothes, which were with her in the house, and he put them on Jacob, her younger son. And she put the skins of the young goats on his hands and on the smooth part of his neck. Then she gave her son Jacob the delicious meat and the bread which she had prepared. So I left this story on a cliffhanger, but I'm not going to tell you what happens. You're just going to have to listen to more podcast episodes to learn the rest of the story. Oh no. So we are going to talk about verses 1 through 17 today. Now Isaac was very old, and you remember Isaac. He was the one we were talking about in the last chapter of Genesis, in Genesis chapter 26. That entire chapter was about Isaac, and Isaac was Abraham's son. Now Isaac is getting very old, and it says in verse 1 that his eyes were too dim to see. So basically he was blind, and he was getting on in years. He was probably in his mid-100s at this point, and he calls in his elder and favorite son Esau. So he calls for his son, and Esau was his favorite son. Now Isaac had 2 known sons, which are Jacob and Esau. And Esau was the favorite son of Isaac, but Jacob was the favorite son of Rebekah, who was Isaac's wife. Now these 2 sons are twins, but God had already promised Rebekah that the younger twin would rule over the older twin. So Rebekah is probably remembering this promise that God had given to her about her two sons. And I also believe that's probably why Jacob, the younger twin, was Rebekah's favorite twin, though Isaac and Rebekah should not have had favorites with their children, because obviously it causes some severe issues here in this story, but they did. And this is the story of what happens because of the parents' favoritism towards each child. So Isaac calls in Esau and he says to him, "My son." And Esau answers him, "Here I am." And Isaac says, "See, look, I am getting old. I am very old, and I don't know now when I'm going to die." And he says to him, "Go out and take your hunting gear and your quiver full of arrows and your bow, and go and hunt for me and bring me back some of that delicious venison that I love and prepare it for me. And then I will give you basically my last will and testament, or a blessing, as my firstborn son before I die. And I will give that to you." Now, a firstborn son would often get a blessing from their father before they died. This was almost like the father's last will and testament, basically like what I said. So this was very, very important for the firstborn son to receive. But we will find out later in Genesis that it's not always the firstborn son that receives this last blessing. Sometimes it is the younger son, and we will find that out later on in Genesis. So Isaac did not have to give Esau this blessing, though it was customary to give the firstborn son this blessing. Isaac did not have to do this. He could have given it to Jacob, as God had said many years prior, that Jacob was going to rule over Esau. Isaac could have listened to that promise that God had given him and blessed Jacob instead. But Isaac instead is insistent upon giving his favorite child, or Esau, this blessing instead of Jacob. And we read, I think it was in Genesis chapter 25, that Isaac really only loved Esau the best because he considered Esau to be this manly hunter that went out and got all this delicious food for him. So Isaac was really concerned about eating well, as we all are, as I am. I love eating well. But Isaac loved this delicious meat that Esau would bring home. So he tells Esau, "Go on and get me some more of that delicious meat that I love, and then I will bless you as my final will and testament towards you." So Esau leaves, but Rebekah, the wife, overhears everything Isaac is saying to Esau. So I don't know if she was casually listening in or if she was being sneaky and just, eavesdropping pretty much, but she overhears this and she is not happy. She doesn't want Esau to be the blessed child. She wants Jacob to be the blessed child because firstly, she likes Jacob better. Jacob was her favorite son. And secondly, she probably remembered that promise about how God was going to bless Jacob. But she's not thinking about it in a godly sense. She's thinking about it selfishly, like Esau cannot have this blessing. God is not strong enough to give Jacob that blessing. Esau might get it. So she wasn't trusting in God to fulfill his promises. She was taking matters into her own hands, and that is never a good idea. So she goes to Jacob and she says, "Listen, I heard your father saying this stuff to Esau about how he's going to bless him, but that blessing belongs to you. Go out and kill these 2 goats for me so that I can make some delicious meat like your father loves, and then he will bless you instead of Esau." So I've never had goat meat before, but I can't imagine that it tastes the same as venison, which is what Isaac had asked Esau to go out and bring for him. So the fact is, it's probably very likely that Isaac was super old at this point and may have also lost some of his sense of smell or some of his taste buds. So the fact that Rebekah is asking Jacob to bring him goats instead of venison says something about Isaac's age right here. So she says, "Go out and bring these goats, and I will cook them in the way that your dad loves. And so I will make him this delicious, savory dish of meat. And he says, then you can bring it into your father, and your father will think you are Esau, and then you will get the blessing from your father rather than Esau. But Jacob says to Rebekah, he says, look, Esau is super hairy. And you remember that story, I think it was in Genesis chapter 25, where Esau was a very hairy child and he came out of the womb almost covered in like this rug. So he was a unique looking kid, and he probably grew up to be just a very hairy guy. And Jacob was not like that. He was smooth all over. He was a smooth guy. And so Jacob says to Rebekah, his mom, he says, Esau's super hairy and I am super smooth. If I bring the dish to Dad and he touches my arms and feels that I am not hairy like Esau, he's going to know that I'm Jacob, and then he's going to curse me rather than bless me. But Rebekah is insistent, and she says, let those curses be on me instead of you. Only listen to me and obey what I am saying. So Jacob goes out and he obeys his mom, and he brings these 2 goats. There was no argument from him. I mean, Jacob also wasn't putting God first either. He was, as well as Rebekah, taking matters into his own hands in order to get that blessing that he desired. Because you remember that he wanted what Esau had. He wanted that birthright that Esau had, and he ended up getting it. And he wants this firstborn blessing as well. So he wants the things that Esau culturally would have gotten. So now he is taking matters into his own hands to get that final blessing that he knew technically Esau was supposed to get. So he obeys his mom, and he goes out and he kills these 2 young goats, and he has Rebekah prepare this delicious feast for Isaac. And it says in verse 15 that Rebekah took Esau's clothes. So she steals from her son Esau, and he takes his clothes and she puts them onto Jacob. And then she also puts the skins of the young goats on his hands and on the smooth part of his neck. So goats are, naturally very hairy. And so she takes the skins of the goats and she puts them on Jacob and also Esau's clothes to make it feel like this is Esau, just in case Isaac touches Jacob. Then to conclude in verse 17, it says that Rebekah gives her son Jacob the delicious meat and the bread which she had prepared in order so that Jacob can take this in to Isaac and deceive him. So what happens next? I guess you'll just have to find out on Friday. So join me then, 6 a.m. to hear a little bit more of this story. Now tomorrow we will be talking about Matthew chapter 12, once again at 6 a.m. So join me tomorrow. Now, of course, I'm going to ask that you rate this podcast 5 stars. That is a big help to me. That is how people find this podcast. If you rate it or if you like it from whatever platform you are listening on, that will help other people be able to see the podcast, and then the gospel can get spread a little bit more. I want to thank you guys so much for tuning in. My listenership is growing significantly, and I'm very thankful about that. And I do appreciate you guys liking and sharing the podcast on your social media platforms, which is what we're supposed to do. We are supposed to spread the gospel to every creature. That is the Great Commission that Jesus talks about. Now I'm going to put a link to my blog in the bio of this podcast, and I encourage you to go into that link and to subscribe to the blog posts. I do a blog post almost every single Saturday. Sometimes I forget to write one, but I do a blog post pretty much every single Saturday, and that will show up in your inbox at 6:30 a.m. on Saturday mornings. And that is because I do not do a podcast episode on Saturday, at least not yet. I'm thinking about potentially maybe doing one sometime in the future, but just not yet. So that is a good alternative if you want some good Christian-based content on Saturdays. So I will put a link to my blog in the bio of the podcast. But guys, I've got nothing else to say except happy listening and God bless.